Runaway Ralph, Chapter 4, page 75. Ralph always found something interesting to watch. Campers spreading their sleeping bags out in the sun to air, counselors leading singing and directing skits around the campfire in the evening, boys racing to be first in line when the bell was rung to announce meals, boys and girls in cowboy boots or English riding boots going off toward the barn for riding lessons. Boys and girls played, and kittens romped under the walnut trees. Catso discovered a small hole in the craft shop's rusty screen door, which he explored with a paw as if it were a mouse hole, but faithful old Sam always arrived to tell him to move on. Never once did Garf forget to care for Ralph, and when he was not singing in his strange voice, he sometimes spoke. "Hi, little fellow," he would say, as he quickly detached the water bottle from the cage and refilled it at the sink. He even offered Ralph a sunflower seed with his fingers. Ralph was so lonely he was tempted to accept the seed for the sake of companionship. Then he remembered the song about mice getting banged on the head and retreated to the corner of his cage. One afternoon, when Ralph was particularly lonely, he decided that a boy who fed a mouse 3 times a day could not be so bad after all, and that the next time a sunflower seed was offered, he would venture out and accept it from the boy's fingers. However, when Garth finally came, he began to sing again. This time, the song was different from the one campers were singing over in the dining hall. It provoked Ralph's curiosity because he'd heard others sing it but had been unable to catch the words. The campers never sang this song when Aunt Jill was around, which made Ralph even more curious about the words. He was under the impression that they were not fit for grown-up ears, which of course made the song all the more interesting. Garf sang, and Ralph listened. Great green gobs of greasy, grimy gopher guts, stimulated monkey feet, chopped up baby parakeet. That was enough for Ralph. In his haste to hide, he bumped into the spout of his water bottle and flooded one side of his cage. He found refuge behind a lettuce leaf, where he sat trembling with nerves and fright, while he refused to listen to another word of that fearsome song. Why, the next line might be about mice! Ralph stayed hidden behind the leaf for a long, long time. He was now certain that there was no hope of ever communicating with Garf. Chopped up baby parakeet? Garf actually relished the dreadful words. Then one day, not long after Ralph had concluded that he was doomed to loneliness, a freckle-faced girl wearing a baggy sweatshirt, shorts, and cowboy boots came into the craft shop carrying a cage at least 10 times the size of Ralph's cage. He set it on the table in the nature corner. "Hi, Aunt Jill. I'm back, and here's Chum again," she announced. "I brought his box of food and a bag of cedar shavings." Aunt Jill dropped the strands of the lanyard she was demonstrating to hug the girl. "Well, hi, Lana. Welcome back. It's good to see you again. Chum will have a friend this year, a mouse one of the new boys caught in a butterfly net." She lifted the big cage onto the shelf beside Ralph's cage. Ralph sat on his wheel to get a better look at the new occupant of the nature corner, a cranky-looking animal with tan and white fur. Ralph, who had never seen such an animal, watched silently while the creature, whatever it was, shoved and pushed and stomped at the cedar shavings in his cage. He seemed to have difficulty arranging them to his satisfaction. Next he went through his food dish, picking out a number of small green pellets, and shoved them outside his cage. The cedar shavings still did not please him, so he went back to shoving, pushing, and stomping. From time to time he paused to gnaw noisily at the bars of his cage with his long, curved teeth. Finally, when the bell had rung and the campers had gone off for their noon meal, Ralph, in his eagerness for companionship, could no longer remain silent. "What are you, anyway?" he asked. "Some kind of fancy gopher?" The animal spat a green pellet out of his cage before he shot Ralph a withering look of scorn. "Fancy gopher, indeed," he sniffed. "Well," Ralph faltered, "I didn't know. You can't blame me for asking." "I'm a hamster," said the animal, "a golden hamster. I am clean, odorless, and alert." "You don't look gold to me," said Ralph. "You look tan and hairy." At that response, the hamster turned his back on the mouse. Ralph nibbled a kernel of corn before he made up his mind to try again. "Pretty nice place we have here," he remarked. "Plenty of food and water. Interesting things to watch." The hamster climbed on his exercise wheel and sat swinging to and fro while he stared at Ralph. When Chum remained silent, Ralph continued, "It's safe from the cat, too." Chum appeared never to blink his eyes. "Maybe," he said. Ralph's whiskers trembled. That one word spoken by the hamster hinted at evils unknown to Ralph. Here was an animal who was wise in the ways of the world. "Well, go on," thought Ralph impatiently. "Tell me more." Chum was silent. Finally Ralph was forced to say, "How come that girl brought you here to Happy Acres?" "It's a long story," said Chum. "I'm not in any hurry," said Ralph. "Go on." Chum spat the whole of a sunflower seed into the bottom of his cage. "I was one of 13 hamsters, 6 girls and 7 boys, born in the back room of a pet store." 13? Ralph was awed. "That's bigger than my litter. What was it like, living in a pet store?" "We had a happy, carefree childhood there in the cage in the back room," Chum continued. "There was plenty of food and water, and fresh cedar shavings in the bottom of the cage. We slept all day, all 13 of us, in a warm and cozy heap. Then at night, as we grew older, we would play. Oh, the fun we had those nights in the pet shop." Chum paused, a faraway look in his eyes. "Go on," urged Ralph. "Where was I?" asked Chum. "Oh, yes, the frolics we had at night. And then—" Chum's voice shook with emotion. Ralph waited quietly until the hamster was able to continue. "One day, I was sound asleep in the corner of the cage. By then we'd grown a lot, and I was on the bottom of the heap, but I didn't feel squashed. I felt safe and cozy there beneath my brothers and sisters, when suddenly—" Chum stopped, unable to go on. "Don't stop now," pleaded Ralph. "What happened?" "A great human hand, a hand that smelled of dog," Ralph shuddered, "reached in and picked up several of my brothers and sisters. Let me tell you, that woke us all up in a hurry. We were terrified. We scrambled around, trying to hide behind our mother, under the wheel, in some cedar shavings, any place. I was slower than the rest, because, you see, I was cramped from being slept on by my brothers and sisters, and so the hand, that terribly doggy hand, got me. It didn't matter. That hand got all us youngsters, and turned us upside down in a most undignified fashion, and then we were put into 2 cages, boys in one and girls in the other." "What for?" asked Ralph. "Don't rush me," said Chum, picking up a sunflower seed in his paws and cracking it with his teeth. When he'd eaten the kernel, he continued, "Let me tell you, it was a terrible shock. Shortly after, the doggy hand picked up our cage and loaded it into what is called a station wagon." "I know." Ralph was eager to show off his knowledge. "I used to see them in the parking lot outside the hotel. They were always full of children and luggage, and sometimes a dog or 2. Chum ignored the interruption. "We soon found ours was not the only cage to go into the station wagon. Our sisters were loaded in beside us, along with a box of turtles, a cage of rather downhearted canaries, 2 large cages, one containing puppies, and the other some very silly kittens. Oh, yes, and a cage of white mice." "White mice?" said Ralph scornfully. "Anybody, not just owls, could see white mice in the dark." Then the man with the doggy-smelling hand climbed into the front seat, along with his wife, and we were off. "Where to?" asked Ralph. "The county fair," answered Chum, "and it was a terrible trip. Kittens meowed, puppies whimpered, turtles scrabbled around in their box." "What's a county fair?" interrupted Ralph. "A noisy place," said Chum. "It's full of people yelling, children laughing and shrieking, machinery that whirls and spins and plays music, all sorts of animals that neigh and moo and baa. It was hot and dusty, and our cages were set out in a booth. By that time, we hamsters were exhausted. It had been light for several hours, and we hadn't had a wink of sleep." "I know what you mean," said Ralph with feeling. "That was only the beginning," continued Chum. "A steady stream of people, mostly children, passed our cages. Big, little, most of them sticky, and all of them noisy. 'Look, Mommy, look, Daddy, look at the darling little hamsters. I want one. Daddy, buy me a hamster.' all morning long. Parents were better. Don't be silly. Of course you can't have a hamster. You didn't take care of the last hamster you had. Come along, we don't have time to look at hamsters. Then a whole busload of children, all of them wearing white t-shirts with letters across the front. Camp t-shirts? Interrupted Ralph knowledgeably. From Happy Acres? Came crowding around the booth. They didn't have any parents with them, so they bought pets. You? Asked Ralph. Me.